She was blind. She was barefoot. And they threw her into an arena full of wolves to die. Alpha King Darius stood before 10,000 witnesses and stripped his own Luna of her title, not in secret, not in shame, but in front of every pack, every elder, every child old enough to remember. He called her cursed. He called her weak. He sent her through iron gates into a pit where no one has ever walked out alive, and she didn't flinch. Whatever you're doing right now, stop. Drop your city name in the comments. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next will break everything you thought you knew about power. Part 1. The blood moon only came once every 9 years. It hung over the Ashenvale kingdom like an open wound in the sky. Swollen, red-soaked, bleeding light that turned the stone courtyards the color of rust. The old ones called it the Eye of the Wild. The young ones called it bad luck. Either way, it meant the trials were here, and the trials meant sacrifice, and sacrifice meant somebody was going to stand in the arena before the night was done. Seraphina Ashcroft Vane, Luna of the Ashenvale throne, heard the moon before she felt it. That was how it had always been for her. Sensation preceding form, the world arriving in layers of texture and sound and scent before it assembled itself into anything resembling shape. She heard the crowd 2 courtyards away, 10,000 bodies pressing against stone balconies, the low hum of collective anticipation vibrating through the castle's foundation like a second heartbeat. She smelled the torch oil burning along the outer walls, the wild herbs the arena groundskeepers packed into the soil to keep the wolves docile between events, the particular metallic bite of ceremonial armor being buckled onto ceremonial bodies. She dressed without help. She always dressed without help. The chambermaids had stopped offering years ago, not out of cruelty, but because Seraphina's hands knew where everything was. Her fingers moved across the polished stone of her dressing table with the practiced certainty of someone who had memorized the exact weight and texture of every object she owned. The silver comb sat 3 fingers from the left edge. The ceremonial vial of moon ash sat beside the mirror she had never once looked into. Her formal robe, heavy silk threaded with deep blue, the color of a Luna's authority, hung precisely 2 arm lengths from the door. She pulled it on, smoothed the seams flat, laced the collar herself. The knock came before she finished. My lady. It was Corvin, her personal guard. 22 years in the castle's service, barrel-chested, speaks like he's always clearing gravel out of his throat. The procession assembles in the lower court. I know. The Alpha King has already descended. Seraphina's hands stilled at her collar for exactly 1 breath. Then she finished the last lace. Did he send for me? A pause. Brief. Corvin was a terrible liar, but he tried. The summons was general, my lady. Corvin? He did not specifically send. He didn't send for me at all. The silence confirmed it. She reached for her walking staff, carved elder ash, smooth from years of use, weighted exactly right in the palm, and turned from the table. She didn't need Corvin's arm. She never had. The corridors of the Ashenvale throne castle were 37 steps from her chamber door to the first staircase landing, 42 steps down to the second level, another 63 through the great hall if you kept to the left wall and counted the column bases with the tip of the staff. She had been walking these halls blind since the day she arrived at 17, given in alliance marriage, to a man who looked at her the way you look at a tax document, obligation wearing the skin of a gift. She had counted every step. The great hall was loud tonight, full of the lesser pack lords and their retinues passing through on their way to the arena terraces. The noise flattened when she entered. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they thinned, pulled back from her like water from a shore. She heard it. She always heard it. The specific quality of silence that meant people were watching and trying to look like they weren't. A child's voice, high and unguarded. Is that the blind one? A woman's voice, hushing. Don't stare. But why can't she see? The hushing grew sharper. Seraphina walked through the gap between them without turning her head. The staff tapped a clean rhythm against the stone. She kept her spine straight and her pace even, and she did not acknowledge anyone, because acknowledging them would mean acknowledging what she'd heard, and what she'd heard was the question she'd been living inside of for 6 years. Why can't she see? like blindness was a choice she'd made and could simply unchoose. The lower court smelled like war preparation, oiled leather, nervous sweat, the specific sharp acid scent of men performing bravery they don't entirely feel. Serafina stepped into it and felt the crowd's attention shift onto her like a physical weight, settling across her shoulders and the back of her neck with the intimacy of a hand she hadn't asked for. Darius's voice cut through the noise before she'd taken 5 steps. "You're late." Not a question, not even an accusation, really, more like a notation, a fact being entered into a record that only he maintained. She turned toward his voice and found him 20 feet ahead, raised slightly on the court's ceremonial steps, surrounded by his war council and the 3 senior pack lords who'd traveled in for the trials. She couldn't see his face, but she knew it, had memorized the architecture of his jaw and brow with her hands during the early months of their marriage. Back when he'd still allowed it, back before he decided that her touching his face was a concession he resented giving. Strong jaw, wide-set eyes, a scar through his left brow from a border dispute when he was 19, a mouth built for commands, unused to apologies. "The procession time was not communicated to me directly," she said. "Even, clean, not apologetic. The procession time is standard, has been for 9 years. Then we agree I know what time it is." Something shifted in the crowd's quality of silence. A few people who shouldn't have found that amusing tried very hard not to. Darius's exhale was slow and controlled, the particular exhale of a man deciding which weapon to reach for. "Walk behind the council formation," he said. "We move in 10 minutes. She felt it like a fist pressed flat against her sternum. Behind the council. Not beside him, not in the place Aluna stood beside her alpha during the blood moon procession, not in the position that every formal portrait and palace tapestry showed, not where tradition demanded she be. Behind. Serafina said nothing. She moved to her assigned position. Corvin fell in beside her, quietly, without being asked, with the particular loyalty of a man who can't fix what's wrong but refuses to leave you alone with it. She didn't thank him. He didn't need it. They had long since passed the stage of their arrangement where words were required for the important things. The procession moved. Ashenvale's arena was built into the hillside east of the castle proper, a deep oval pit of compressed earth and old stone, ringed by tiered balconies that could seat 12,000 on a packed night. Tonight was a packed night. Serafina heard the crowd's roar hit her from 300 yards out, a wall of sound that pressed against her skin and chest, the blood moon's light. Even through her sealed shut eyes, even through the permanent dark that had swallowed her sight since the fever at age 11, she felt it. Something warm and red pulsing at the edge of her awareness, like an ember that refused to die. She had never understood why. She had stopped asking physicians. The pack lords split off toward their designated terraces. Darius led the main body up the central walkway toward the king's dais, the elevated platform at the arena's north end, where the throne chair sat, where the Alpha King stood during trials to watch and judge. The Luna's chair sat beside it, equal height, silver-backed. Serafina followed Corvin's whispered directions. 3 steps up, platform surface, turn right. She found her chair and sat in it and folded her hands in her lap and listened to the crowd settle into the low roar of anticipation that preceded the opening ceremonies. Darius didn't speak to her. She hadn't expected him to. Elder Soren's voice rose above the crowd, amplified by the arena's curved acoustics, the old ceremonial voice of the Ashenvale Kingdom's eldest pack authority. 80 years of gravel and conviction packed into a frame Serafina had always imagined as small and iron-backed. People of Ashenvale, bloodkin of the wild packs, clans of the eastern borders and the northern highlands, welcome to the 9-year blood moon trials. The crowd's roar rose and fell. Tonight we honor the old covenant between civilized pack and wild wolf. Tonight we test, we witness, and we decide who among us is strong enough to lead into the next 9 years. The formal preamble went on for another 7 minutes. Serafina tracked it with half her attention. The other half she spent cataloging the sounds around her on the dais. The shift of Darius's boots on the stone platform, the low, murmured conversation between 2 of the War Council members behind her, the particular quality of the wind coming off the arena floor, carrying with it the thick animal scent of the wolves penned below. They were agitated tonight. She could smell it, the sharp rolling storm quality of their distress, layered underneath the arena's usual blood and earth. Wolves read environments, not words, and whatever the arena's environment was telling them tonight, they didn't like it. She filed that away. Alpha King Darius. Soren's voice sharpened with formality. Do you bring declaration to the Blood Moon? I do. Darius rose. She heard the throne chair scrape, heard him step forward to the dais edge. His voice, when it came, was steady and enormous. The kind of voice built to carry over distances, over wind, over the noise of 10,000 people. People of Ashenvale, I bring declaration of correction. The crowd murmured. Correction? Soren again. A note she didn't expect. Hesitation. The elder hadn't known this was coming. Neither had she. For 6 years, Darius said, the Ashenvale throne has carried a weakness at its side. I allowed sentiment to cloud judgment. I allowed an alliance obligation to override what every pack law and every tradition demands. That the Luna standing beside the Alpha King must be worthy of that position. Strong, clear-sighted, capable of leading if leadership is required. Seraphina's hands tightened in her lap. She didn't move. She didn't breathe differently. Whatever was happening inside her chest, the sudden cold that wasn't cold, the spreading numbness that wasn't numb, she folded it flat and held it there. I am declaring, before the Blood Moon and the witness of all packs here assembled, that Seraphina Ashcroft Vane is unfit to hold the title of Luna of Ashenvale. The crowd's roar became something else, not celebration, something more complicated. 10,000 people processing shock and deciding in real time what response was appropriate. She heard gasps. She heard a high, startled cry from somewhere in the upper terrace. She heard Corvin's breath catch beside her, sharp and involuntary, a man who'd spent 22 years never showing surprise, managing to lose it for exactly 1 second. The Luna's title, Darius continued, voice carrying over the noise without effort, requires that its holder be capable of standing in trial if called upon. Our laws are clear. The Blood Moon trials do not exempt the Luna's seat from this requirement. They never have. I have waited 9 years to bring this correction because I believed incorrectly that the situation would resolve itself. Resolve itself. Seraphina thought 6 years of marriage, 6 years of walking these corridors and attending these councils and sitting in that chair and learning every inch of this kingdom by feel and scent and sound while you sat across the table and never once asked what I thought. Resolve itself. She thought it without bitterness, which surprised her. It felt more like recognition. The way you recognize, finally, that the ground you've been standing on was never solid to begin with. I am therefore invoking the Luna's trial. His voice hardened into something final. Seraphina Ashcroft Vane will enter the death arena and stand trial before the wild wolves. If she survives, the law considers the title upheld. If she does not, a pause. Not for emotion, for theater. The position will be vacated, and a new Luna determined by the council's selection. The arena noise became something animal in its own right, a swell of sound that had no single shape, thousands of voices all running into each other. Seraphina sat in the center of it and didn't move. Her staff was across her knees. Her hands were still. She was thinking about the wolves below and the way they'd smelled when the procession entered, and what that particular distress signal had meant. A hand closed on her arm. You need to stand, Corvin said, very quietly beside her ear. His voice was controlled in the way voices get controlled when the alternative is coming apart. My lady, they're waiting for you to stand. She stood. The crowd noise shifted, not quieter, but different, processing the sight of her on her feet, staff in hand, face turned toward the arena floor by habit rather than sight. She heard people who hadn't believed Darius would do it actually reckoning with the fact that he had. She heard, somewhere close, a female voice that might have been Elder Mira, one of the council's senior women, say something sharp and bitten off that she couldn't make out over the rest of the noise. Seraphina Ashcroft, Soren's voice again. Formal. Heavy. The old man was doing his duty, which was the most damning thing he could do. Processing this legally when any personal instinct he had said something else. She could hear it in the specific weight of the pause before he spoke. By the declaration of the blood moon and the Alpha King's invocation of Luna's trial, do you accept the judgment of the arena? The answer was built into the law. Refusal meant exile. Immediate, public, stripped of everything. Acceptance meant the arena. And the arena meant no one had ever come out. She turned her face toward where Soren's voice had come from. I accept, she said. Her voice carried. She had a voice built for carrying, lower than most people expected from someone her size, with a quality that the castle's choirmaster had once told her, in what he meant as a compliment, would cut through noise like a blade through cloth. She'd never decided how she felt about that description, but she felt it now, felt the way her acceptance dropped into the arena's noise and cut it, just briefly, just for a breath, before the sound rushed back in. Darius said nothing. She hadn't expected him to. They moved her from the dais without ceremony. 2 guards she didn't recognize by footfalls and knew, probably assigned specifically for tonight, probably by someone who understood that Corvin wouldn't be able to keep himself neutral if he was assigned to deliver her to the gate. The walk from the king's dais down through the access corridor to the arena floor was 109 steps. She counted each one. The corridor was narrow and smelled of stone damp and wolf musk, and the particular rust iron scent that arenas accumulate over years of use. The torches were fewer down here. She could tell by how the air moved, by the way the shadows changed the quality of the sound around her. Her boots were soft-soled, and the sound they made against the stone was quieter than the guards' boots. And in the intervals between steps, she listened to the world around her assembling itself into information. The gate was iron. She heard it before she reached it. The quality of the echoes changed, opened up, became the larger space beyond it. The arena floor. The wolves. One of the guards, his boots were the heavier ones, he'd walked a step and a half ahead the whole way, put his hand on the gate mechanism. We open on the Elder's signal, he said. Not to her specifically, to the situation. She stood. She thought about Darius's voice when he'd said resolve itself, and the way it had carried no particular emotion, no anger, no satisfaction, not even the cold relief of a decision finally made. Just the flatness of a man who had long since stopped considering her as something that required feeling. That was the part she couldn't put down, even now, not the betrayal. Betrayal she could understand. People chose survival and power over principle constantly. It was the defining animal truth of the world she lived in. But the flatness, the way she had spent 6 years in the same castle, the same corridors, the same council chambers as Darius Vane, and apparently left no mark on him at all. Not enough warmth to produce real cruelty, not enough cold to produce real hatred, just resolved. Her hand found her staff. She gripped it. The signal came. Soren's amplified voice calling the formal initiation, and the gate opened with a sound like a held breath releasing, and the arena's air hit her full in the face. Hot, thick, layered with 10,000 people above, and the thick wolf scent below, and underneath all of it, earth, real earth, packed dirt that had absorbed blood and sweat and rain over years into something ancient and specific. She walked forward. The crowd above erupted when she cleared the gate. She expected it. 10,000 people watching a blind woman walk into the death arena. She had prepared for that sound, had measured it in advance in the architecture of her expectations, and filed it in the category of things that were going to happen whether she was ready for them or not. She was ready for the crowd. She was not quite ready for the silence of the wolves. The arena floor extended 40 yards in each direction. She had memorized the measurements from the architectural records in the castle library 3 years ago, for reasons she hadn't fully understood at the time. Packed earth. 4 holding gates distributed at the cardinal points, each gate currently closed. The wolves were behind those gates. She stopped in the center of the floor, planted her staff, listened. Above, 10,000 voices running through the full register of human emotion, pity, excitement, anticipation, the specific morbid quality of a crowd that has decided to watch something terrible happen. Below, her boots on packed earth, her own breath. the distant, deep structural sound of the castle's stones settling in the night air. And from behind the four iron gates, nothing. No growling, no scratching, no throwing of bodies against iron in the instinctive wolf way when they caught unfamiliar scent. Just the specific pressed-down silence of animals that had gone very, very still. She had not expected that. The arena master's voice, hard-bitten, used to managing blood sport without sentiment, called the release. 4 gates opened simultaneously. The crowd above hit a peak of sound and held it. The wolves came out. She heard them before she smelled them. Not the crash she'd expected, not the explosion of predator bodies hitting open space and finding prey, but something else. Something that made no sense in the architecture of how she'd understood this moment would go. Padded footfalls on packed earth, multiple sets, moving at a measured pace. Not the full-body lurch of an animal attacking, not even the rolling trot of an animal investigating. Something deliberate. The crowd's volume began a slow, strange descent. The wolves were close. She could smell them properly now. 6, maybe 8 of them in her immediate radius. The thick fur and musk of large males. The sharp, clean note of pack animals that lived fully outside human settlement. Not the blood hunger she'd braced for. Something else riding underneath it. Something she didn't have a word for. Something she'd smelled before in dreams she didn't fully remember on waking. She stood still. Staff planted. Chin level. Waited. The first wolf stopped 12 feet from her. She tracked its position by the shift in air pressure. Large body, stationary, the weight of its attention as physical as a hand. Then another stopped. Then a third. The soft percussion of their movement slowed, and then stopped. Complete stillness. The crowd above had gone from roar to murmur to something approaching actual silence. 10,000 people trying to understand what they were watching. Serafina heard Elder Soren's voice somewhere far above her, speaking to someone beside him, the actual words lost in distance. 12 feet. The nearest wolf. Not attacking. She took one step toward it. Someone above gasped. A single voice, quickly absorbed by the crowd's collective held breath. The wolf, large, she could tell from the depth of its respiration, did not move. Its breathing slowed as she stepped closer. Slowed further. She stopped at 4 feet, and she could feel the heat off its body now, the mass of it, and stillness. Complete. Not the stillness of an animal deciding whether to strike. Something else. Something that felt impossibly like waiting. She lowered the hand, not holding her staff. Held it out, palm down. The wolf's wet nose touched her fingers. Above her, in the king's dais, in the silence that had fallen over 12,000 witnesses, she heard Darius say one word. Quiet, lost under the crowd's collective exhale as it built back toward noise. What? Then the crowd found its voice again, all at once, and whatever he said next was swallowed. But Serafina heard the second word he didn't finish. She heard the way his voice had broken on the first one. She kept her hand steady. The wolf's breath moved across her palm, warm and even. Around her the others, she counted 7 distinct presence points, had arranged themselves in a pattern, circling, not closing in. Something else. Something that looked from the terraces like a guard formation. That was when the 4th gate opened. Not one of the 4 original gates, something else, something deeper in the arena's south wall. Something the crowd had never seen used in 9 years of blood moon trials. She heard the mechanism before anyone above likely saw it. Heavy iron, older than the main gates, moving on hinges that hadn't been turned in a long time. The sound of it was different, larger. The 7 wolves around her didn't scatter. They went still in a different way, the way water goes still when something very large moves underneath it. And from the opened gate, in the copper-red light of the blood moon hanging above them all, came a sound that she had only ever heard described in the oldest texts of the castle library, a text she'd had read aloud to her once by a junior archivist who hadn't understood what he was reading. The sound was a single, low, reverberating call. Not quite howl, not quite roar. Something older than both. Something that dropped into the arena floor through the soles of her boots and climbed her spine like it was coming home. Above her, the crowd had gone fully, completely, utterly silent. All 12,000 of them. Seraphina's staff was still in her left hand. Her right hand still rested where the wolf had touched it. She didn't move. The thing in the gate moved. She could track it by displacement. The way sound moved around a large object, the way the arena's air pressure shifted as something enormous crossed the open floor. The 7 wolves around her pulled back, not fleeing, not scattering, but making room. The way a crowd makes room for someone who doesn't need to be announced. It stopped. 30 feet, 20, 15. She felt it before it reached her. Not heat, not sound, not smell, but something that operated in whatever register her blindness had opened and her sight had never known. Something like pressure in the chest. Something like recognition from a direction she couldn't name. 10 feet. The arena floor was so quiet she could hear the blood moon's light. Or thought she could, which was the same thing in the dark behind her eyes. Seraphina. She didn't know she'd spoken her own name until it was already out. The thing, the creature, the alpha beast, oldest legend of the wild packs, whose name appeared in the founding texts of the Ashenvale Kingdom and in no documented sighting since, stopped. And then it lowered its head. She felt the displacement of air as it moved. She heard the massive knees hit the packed earth, and she heard, from directly above her on the king's dais, the sound of the Alpha King's throne chair scraping back, fast, uncontrolled, as Darius Vane stood up from it. The Alpha Beast's knees were on the ground. That was the fact the arena couldn't process. 12,000 people staring at an animal the size of a draft horse, silver black and ancient, with scars running through its fur like river systems on old maps. And it was kneeling, head down. Massive neck curved toward the earth in the specific posture that wild pack language reserved for one thing and one thing only. Submission. Not the submission of a defeated animal. Not the flattened ears and exposed belly of a wolf that had lost a fight. This was the other kind, Luke. The voluntary kind, the kind that cost something, the kind that in every wild pack tradition Seraphina had ever read about in the castle's library was called the first bow, and was supposed to be physically impossible for an alpha beast to perform for any living creature because alpha beasts didn't have a category above themselves. Except now one was doing it, and the crowd couldn't breathe. Seraphina stood with her right hand still extended, the wolf's breath warm across her palm, and felt the arena reorganizing itself around her. Not in any sense she could name exactly, more the way you feel a room change when the person with the most power in it walks through the door. Except she was already in the room. She was the door. She lowered her hand slowly, turned her face toward the kneeling creature. 12,000 people were watching her do this, and she had not 1 ounce of performance in her. Only attention, only the particular quality of listening that blindness had built in her over 23 years. The listening that went past sound into the thing underneath sound. The alpha beast exhaled. Long. Slow. The sound of something enormous releasing a tension it had been holding for a very long time. Around her, the 7 wolves that had circled her since the gates opened began, one by one, to lower themselves to the ground. Not collapsing. Kneeling. The same posture. The same deliberate, costly submission. The crowd found its voice in pieces. Not the roar of excitement, nothing that clean. This was fractured sound, the noise of people grabbing at the nearest person and asking if they were seeing what they were seeing. The noise of an audience that had come expecting a death, and was now standing inside something it didn't have language for. High above on the king's dais, Darius Vane had not sat back down. She knew this because she had spent 6 years learning the specific acoustic signature of that platform, the way sound traveled down from it, the way his footsteps had a particular weight and rhythm she could pick out of crowds. He was standing at the dais edge. She could feel the quality of his stillness from 120 feet away. She recognized it because she had felt that exact quality before, in the 3rd month of their marriage, when she had walked into the War Council unannounced and solved in 4 sentences a border dispute that his generals had been arguing about for 6 weeks. He had gone that still then. She had thought, at the time, that it might be the beginning of something different between them. She had been wrong. She filed the current stillness away without sentiment and turned her attention back to what was in front of her. The alpha beast had not moved. She took 1 step toward it, felt the air pressure of its mass, Enormous, close, alive in a way that vibrated at a frequency she'd never encountered in any domestic wolf, or any of the arena wolves she'd listened to from above during the practice events. This animal was old in a way that went past counting. She stopped 3 feet from it and crouched down to its level. From above, she knew what this looked like. The blind Luna in her blue silk, crouching in the dirt of the death arena before the most feared creature on the continent, like she was meeting an equal, like she'd done it before. She had done it before. Not this creature, not this arena. But in dreams she hadn't been able to hold on to on waking, in the space behind her eyes, where darkness was not empty but textured. There had been something like this, something enormous and patient, waiting in a register she couldn't access while awake. She put her hand out again. Different this time, not palm down, offering, but open at the side the way you approach something that needs to choose. The alpha beast's head came up. She felt its gaze, couldn't see it, had never seen anything, but felt the weight of focused attention the way you feel sunlight on skin. It was looking at her face. Its nose touched her palm, then its forehead. Heavy, warm, pressing against her hand with deliberate intent. Not an animal sniffing for information, but something making contact in the older sense. The way the old pack text described the recognition touch. The way bloodline bonds were confirmed before the written records existed. Before the councils and the treaties and the formal lunacies. Back when the wild packs and the shifted packs were one thing, not two, and the line between them hadn't been cut yet. Seraphina's throat tightened. She kept her hand steady. Above her, Elder Soren's amplified voice cracked open the silence. What, in the name of all ancient law, is happening? It wasn't a question. Or it was, but not for her. She heard him directing it sideways toward someone on the dais or toward the senior pack lords in their terraces. She heard responses she couldn't make out, the murmur of very important people discovering they had no framework for what they were watching. Then Darius's voice, still on the dais, still not sitting down, directed toward someone beside him. Get Elder Mira, now. My lord, she's in the East Terrace. I said now. The command had an edge she knew. Not anger, something beneath anger, something that anger was covering the way skin covers the thing that actually hurts. She stayed where she was, hand against the alpha beast's forehead, and waited. The arena had reorganized itself into a strange stillness. The 8 wolves on the floor hadn't moved. The crowd hadn't found the language for what it wanted to do. And she was in the middle of it, in the packed dirt, in the blood moon's copper light. And she was thinking about what the old text had said. She had read it, been read it, 7 years ago, before the marriage, when she was still in her father's territory and working through the castle library by having junior archivists read to her in rotation. One text in particular, the Moonborn Record, 3rd volume of the Ashenvale Founding Codex, which the archivist had told her was interesting but probably allegorical. He'd read her 3 pages before someone had interrupted them, and she'd never gotten back to it. 3 pages had been enough. The Moonborn line, a bloodline that the old records described as existing before the division between civilized pack and wild wolf, a bloodline that carried something in the blood the wild packs recognized at a register below thought, below training, below the 1,000 years of territory wars and treaty lines that had built the wall between the 2 worlds. A bloodline that the wild packs would, in the language of the record, defer to. Not bow to, defer. The word in the original was older than either of those translations, something that meant closer to recognize the authority of the blood. Her father had laughed when she'd brought it up at dinner that night. Her father had then given her in marriage 6 months later to an alpha king who had never once asked what she thought about anything. She took her hand back slowly. The alpha beast raised its head but stayed kneeling. She straightened, turned toward the dais. Alpha King. Her voice was even and carried well. The arena's acoustics were on her side. I believe you had something you wanted to prove. The silence that followed had a specific quality. The silence of 12,000 people holding themselves very still to hear what came next. Darius's voice came back. Come up from the floor. Not a concession, not an apology, a command. She noticed the shape of it. He was still operating inside the mode of a man who gives orders, which meant he hadn't finished processing what he'd seen, which meant he was afraid. She'd learned to read his fear early. It always came out as commands. "I don't think I will," she said. Another silence. Shorter. "Serafina." A different register now. Lower. Warning. "You sent me into this arena, Darius. The trial isn't over until the arena master calls it." She paused. "Unless you want to call it yourself." She felt the weight of what she'd just done settle over the arena. The specific weight of a public challenge delivered in front of witnesses who would remember every word. This wasn't a private argument. This was 12,000 people, and the pack lords in their terraces, and Elder Soren with his amplification and his obligation to the law. And she had just made Darius choose on the record, in front of all of them, between calling the trial and conceding his judgment had been wrong, or letting it run its legal course. There was no good option in that choice. She had put him there on purpose. The alpha beast shifted beside her, not standing but moving, settling into a different arrangement of its massive body. Comfortable. Patient. Like it had nowhere else to be. Elder Soren's voice, amplified. "The Luna's trial has no designated conclusion point other than the arena master's call, or death. As the alpha beast has not attacked," a pause that contained years of legal experience choosing words with extreme precision, "the trial conditions have not been met for either outcome." "Then we wait," Serafina said. Still even, still carrying. High on the dais, she heard Darius take 3 steps, the specific rhythm of a man pacing against his own impulse, a man walking the edge of a decision and not finding solid ground on either side. She heard Elder Mira's voice arrive from somewhere, clipped, female, authoritative. And then the low-grade argument that erupted between 3 people who thought they were managing tonight's events and were now realizing they weren't managing anything. Lord Cassian's voice cut through from the East Terrace, younger than Soren, the pack lord of the Northern Highland clans, a voice she'd always tracked as someone who thought faster than he spoke and said less than he knew. "Elder Soren, does the Moonborn record have any bearing on what we're witnessing?" Dead silence. Then Soren, "Where did you hear that name?" "The 3rd volume of the Founding Codex, which I have read, unlike several people currently standing on that dais." A pause with an edge in it. "I'll ask again. Does it apply?" Whatever Soren said in response was too low for her to catch, but she heard the quality of his voice, old, steady, and rattled, which was 3 things she'd never heard from him simultaneously. And she filed that away alongside everything else. She was building something. She hadn't known, walking into this arena tonight, that she would be building it. She'd walked in with nothing except the accumulated architecture of 6 years of careful attention, 6 years of listening to a kingdom from its edges, 6 years of being underestimated by everyone in it, including the man who was supposed to know her best. She'd had nothing except that. It turned out to be everything. "Serafina," Darius's voice again. Different this time. He'd stopped pacing. She could tell by the absence of that 3-step rhythm. He was at the dais edge again, leaning into the arena's acoustics, and the edge that had been in his voice before was still there, but it had changed shape. "What are you doing?" "Standing in an arena you put me in," she said. "Surviving, by your word, the trial you invoked." "That's not—" He stopped. She heard the swallow. "What is that animal?" "You know what it is." "Serafina?" "Say the name, Darius." Another silence. Longer. She let it sit. She had learned in 6 years of a marriage built on one party speaking and one party listening that silence was a pressure you could apply, that the person with the most to lose from a silence filling up was the person with the most to say. "The alpha beast," he said finally, quiet enough that it didn't carry beyond the immediate vicinity of the dais. Private, which was the problem, this needed to be public. She turned toward the center of the arena, toward the place where the crowd's acoustic center sat, and raised her voice. "Lord Cassian asked the right question," she said. "The Moonborn record, 3rd volume, the founding codex that every pack lord in those terraces has access to, and most of you have never read." She paused. "Let that land. I've had it read to me 4 times. Every word, Because when you can't see the world the way other people see it, you learn to look at the records more carefully. The crowd was locked in. She could feel it. The specific quality of 12,000 people who have stopped doing anything except listening. The Moonborn line ended 140 years ago, Elder Soren said from above. His amplification carried it across the whole arena. Involuntary, she thought. He'd meant it as a quiet correction, and the amplification had caught him. Did it? She said. Not a question. The Alpha Beast raised its head. She felt the shift in it, something moving under the surface of the animal's stillness, something building. She didn't know what was coming. She couldn't have predicted it, but her hand was still slightly extended from when she'd touched its forehead, and the warmth coming off the creature's body was the same warmth that lived in the center of her chest on cold mornings, had always lived there, had always felt like something reaching from the inside for something outside that wasn't there yet. Was there now? The Alpha Beast stood, not attacking, rising. To its full height, which the text had described as 12 hands at the shoulder, which was an abstraction until she felt the displacement of air as it reached full height beside her. And the 12 hands became something real and enormous that made the air move differently around both of them. Then it tilted its head back and called. Not the low rumble she'd heard when it entered. This was the other sound, the declaration sound, the sound the old text described with a word that had no good translation, closer to announcement than howl, closer to proclamation than cry. The sound of a wild pack saying, "This is the one." The 8 wolves on the floor answered it simultaneously. And from outside the arena walls, from the hills to the east where the wild packs held their blood moon territories, from distances she hadn't imagined would carry into the stone and noise of the arena, the answer came back. Not one howl, not 10. More than she could count, layered and cascading, building on each other like a language being spoken at full volume for the first time in 140 years. Above her, on the king's dais, she heard Darius Vane take one step backward. Just one. But she heard it. And she heard, underneath the massive wall of sound filling the arena, the first crack in the architecture of tonight. Lord Cassian's voice reaching Soren, sharp and low. That call. That's the recognition call. That's the pack call for a Moonborn heir. That hasn't been heard in... I know what it is, Soren said. Elder, if she's... I know what it is. His voice had changed. The authority was still there, but something underneath it had shifted, the way bedrock shifts when you realize the ground above it is different from what you thought. I've known what it was for 30 years. I just didn't know where she was. The words were quiet. The amplification caught them anyway. And those 2 sentences, were the thing that could not be taken back. Not by anyone. Not by Darius on the dais. Not by the council members grabbing at each other's arms in the terrace above. Not by the pack lords whose voices were all running together now into something that had moved past shock into the territory of reckoning. Seraphina stood in the center of the arena. The Alpha Beast stood beside her, and somewhere above her, moving fast now toward the dais's back exit, were 2 men she hadn't tracked yet tonight. Footsteps she'd registered on the way in and filed and hadn't pulled back out because she'd been managing everything else. 2 sets of boots, moving in tandem, moving away from the primary noise of the crowd in the specific, purposeful way of people who have a destination planned. She pulled them out of memory and held them there. Not guards. Guards move differently, synced to their principal, halting when the principal halted. These 2 moved independently, together but not assigned together, chosen together, moving toward the castle's interior access corridors. Moving, she thought, toward the places where power lived when it wasn't performing itself in arenas. The Alpha Beast's shoulder pressed against her arm. Warm, solid, deliberate. She pressed back. She had survived the arena. The arena, she was beginning to understand, was the easy part. The 2 sets of boots were gone. Seraphina had tracked them until the arena's ambient noise swallowed the last trace. Somewhere past the interior access corridor, past the point where stone absorbed sound differently, past the reach of what even her attention could hold. She didn't know their names yet. She knew their rhythm, the way they moved together without coordinating, the specific pattern of people who had rehearsed a contingency. This was the contingency. She understood that the way you understand a trap after your foot is already in it, not with surprise, but with the cold, clarifying recognition of a pattern you should have seen 3 steps earlier. The arena had been a distraction, a spectacular one, with 12,000 witnesses and the Alpha Beast and Elder Soren's voice cracking open in front of everyone, but a distraction nonetheless. While she had been standing in packed dirt proving what she was, something else had been moving, something that had been moving for a long time before tonight. She kept her face forward, kept her hand against the Alpha Beast's shoulder, let the recognition settle into her bones without showing it on her skin, because whatever was watching her right now, and everything was watching her, every eye on every terrace, she needed them to see stillness. Stillness was the only currency she had left that hadn't been spent. Seraphina, Corvin's voice from the arena gate. He'd been let through. She heard the gate mechanism, heard his boots on the arena floor, heard the specific quality of his pace. He was moving fast and trying not to look like it. "We need to move." What happened? Not here. Corvin. He stopped 3 feet from her. She heard his breathing, controlled, but working at it. A man who had seen something and was currently deciding how much to put in his face. The council chambers. Someone's already in it. Which someone? Lord Vale's men. A pause. And Lord Brennan's. Vale and Brennan, Eastern Lowlands and the coastal territories. The 2 pack lords who had voted most loudly in every council session she'd sat outside of and listened to through the stone walls, against the alliance that had brought her to Ashenvale in the first place. The 2 voices that had spent 6 years reminding Darius, in the careful language of advisors who never say what they mean directly, that a blind Luna was a liability the throne couldn't afford. The 2 sets of boots. She had the shape of it now. Not all the details, not the mechanism, but the shape. The thing she hadn't let herself name until this moment, because naming it required accepting that the 6 years of careful, patient attention she'd spent learning this kingdom had been running parallel to something else she hadn't known to look for. She turned toward the gate. The Alpha Beast moved with her. She heard Corvin's breath catch, the involuntary sound of a man recalibrating. Is that animal going to... Yes, she said. The whole way? I don't know. She found the gate with her staff in her memory, but I'm not sending it back. The corridors were different with the Alpha Beast beside her. The sound changed, the way sound always changes around large bodies, but also the way it changes around things that other things are afraid of. She heard the castle staff they passed pulling back from doorways. She heard 2 guards at the secondary corridor junction go completely silent as she came through, and then, after she passed, heard one of them say something very quietly to the other that she couldn't make out, but whose tone she understood perfectly. The world was reorganizing around what it had seen in the arena. It hadn't finished yet. She had maybe 30 minutes before it finished, before whatever was moving in the council chamber finished moving, before the thing that Vale and Brennan had set in motion tonight reached whatever endpoint they'd planned for it. 30 minutes or less. She had learned in 23 years of building a life inside permanent darkness that the question was never whether time was limited. The question was always what you did with the specific weight and shape of the time you had. The King's Council chamber was 64 steps from the interior access corridor's junction. She knew this. She counted as she moved and arrived at the door exactly where her memory said it would be. Heavy oak, iron-banded, with a slight warp on the bottom left that made it catch on the stone threshold when it opened. Voices inside. Not quiet. She pressed her palm flat to the door and listened. Lord Vale, the record doesn't change the succession law. It can't. A bloodline claim without verified documentation is a story, not a legal instrument. Lord Brennan. Soren verified it in front of 12,000 witnesses. That is documentation. Soren said he'd known for 30 years. That means he withheld it for 30 years. That's grounds for censure, not grounds for a coronation. A third voice, one she placed after a half-second's reach into memory. Lord Croft. Minor territory, eastern border, had always voted with Vale. The Alpha Beast alone changes nothing legally. The Wild Packs operate outside our jurisdictional... The Wild Packs just declared a moonborn heir in the middle of the Blood Moon trials, Brennan said, and his voice had an edge that wasn't argument. something tighter, something that had the quality of fear using anger as its scaffolding. That's not outside jurisdiction. That's inside our walls. That's inside the treaty we signed at the founding. The recognition call triggers the Moonborn Clause, and we all know it. The Moonborn Clause requires the heir to... She opened the door. The warped bottom caught on the threshold exactly as she remembered. She pushed through it without slowing, the alpha beast's shoulder brushing the doorframe on one side, her staff finding the open floor on the other. She heard the room's conversation cut off. Not taper, not slow, cut, like a cord pulled. 4 lords. 3 she'd already placed by voice. The 4th she identified by his breathing pattern. Lord Aldrich, the Western Mountain Territory, who had a slight nasal quality to his exhale that she'd catalogued in the first week of her marriage, and never found occasion to use until this moment. Corvin came through behind her. Lady Seraphina. Vale's voice. Controlled. The voice of a man who was very good at controlling his voice and knew it. This chamber is currently... I know what it is, she said. I've sat outside this chamber for 6 years while you had conversations in it you didn't want me to hear. She moved to the head of the table, found it with her staff, found the chair, stood behind it without sitting. I heard most of them anyway. A silence that had several different textures in it, depending on which person she was reading. The Moonborn Clause, she said. Brennan has the right of it. You all know the text. The founding treaty specifies that in the event of a recognition call during a declared trial, the Moonborn heir assumes provisional authority over both civilized pack and wild wolf territories until a full council convening can be called. She paused. That convening must happen within 48 hours of the call. You've read the treaty, Vale said. Flat. Not a question. 4 times. I had the archivist read it to me, and then I had him read it again 3 months later to make sure I remembered it right. 3rd and 4th reads, I had a different archivist to make sure the first one hadn't paraphrased. She found the chair's back with both hands. I've had a lot of time to read, Lord Vial. You and the Alpha King made sure of that. The Alpha Beast had settled near the door. She could feel its presence behind her like a second spine, solid, patient, something that had decided where it was going to be and had no intention of renegotiating. Croft. This is irregular. A blind woman walking out of the death arena with the Alpha Beast kneeling beside her is irregular, she said. The law is very regular. 48 hours. Full council. Do any of you want to be recorded as the lords who refused a legal convening after a verified recognition call? Another silence. This one with less texture. The silence of people doing calculations and not liking the results. Vale's chair moved. She heard him stand. His voice, when it came, had dropped. Quieter, which was more dangerous than loud. She had learned this about him in year 2. You don't understand what you're walking into. Enlighten me. The council convening will expose things. He stopped. She heard the weight of the choice he was making, how much to give, how much to hold, things that go beyond tonight, beyond the arena, beyond whatever legal standing the Moonborn Clause gives you. What things? Seraphina. His voice shifted again. And this was the thing that made her go very still, because it shifted into something she hadn't expected. Not threat, not authority, something almost like warning. The arrangement that brought you here, your father's alliance with the Ashenvale throne, the terms of it were not what you were told. The room had gone the specific quiet of people who know something and are watching someone find out. She kept her hands on the chair back, kept her face even. Internally, something very cold moved through the space behind her sternum. Not fear, not quite, but fear's structural cousin. The kind of cold that comes when you realize the map you've been using is drawn wrong. What terms? She said. Vale exhaled. Your father knew about the Moonborn line. 3 seconds of silence. He knew before the marriage, Vale continued. He brought it to Darius, to the previous council, as a selling point. The blind daughter, who the wild packs would recognize. A living instrument for controlling pack territory that no Alpha King had been able to consolidate in 140 years. A pause. You were not given an alliance marriage, Seraphina. You were sold as a tool. with full knowledge of what you were. The chair's wood was solid under her hands. She focused on that, the grain of it, the temperature of it, the specific pressure of her fingers against the edge. The world had a tendency to become very loud in moments like this, and she had learned over 23 years to anchor herself in the tactile rather than let the loud thing pull her under. Her father had known. Her father had known what she was, what the wild packs would do when they saw her, what the moonborn claws meant for whoever held her close enough to point her where they wanted. And he had packaged that knowledge and sold it to Darius Vane and called it a marriage alliance and put her in a carriage and sent her 300 miles from everything she'd ever known. She thought about the morning she'd left, her father's hand on her shoulder, brief, formal, the specific quality of a touch that was performing something it didn't feel. She had thought at 17 that it was grief, the difficulty of letting go. She had given him that interpretation because it had been easier than the other one. She had been carrying the easier interpretation for 6 years. Who else knew? She said. Her voice was level. She was very focused on keeping it level. Vale. The senior council, 3 lords at the time. 2 are dead. I'm the remaining one. Darius. A pause. Darius was told on the wedding night. She absorbed that. Wedding night. The night he'd sat across from her in the formal chamber while the celebration noise filtered through the walls, and asked her, the first real question he'd ever asked her, whether she could tell direction by sound or only distance. She had thought it was curiosity. She had thought it was the beginning of him trying to understand her. He had been assessing the instrument. And the arena tonight, she said, sending me to the death arena, was that Darius acted on his own. But Vale's voice had a quality she couldn't fully parse. Not defensive, but something in that neighborhood. Whatever his reasons tonight, that was not the council's instruction. Then what was the council's instruction? Silence. Lord Vale. Her voice dropped. She let it drop. Let it lose the evenness and find the thing underneath it. Because the evenness had been for the arena, for the public, for 12,000 witnesses, who needed to see a woman walking into wolves without flinching. In this room, with 4 lords who already knew what she was, the evenness was just distance. She was done with distance. What was the council's instruction for tonight? Brennan answered instead of Vale, and she heard in the choice, Brennan breaking before Vale was ready, the first real fracture in whatever these 4 men had come into this chamber to do. Control, Brennan said. The recognition call was always going to happen eventually. The senior council, planned for it. Whoever was standing beside you when the call happened would be positioned as the Moonborn heir's authority, her partner, her guide. His voice had taken on a quality, not guilt exactly, something rawer and less processed. Darius wasn't supposed to put you in the arena. He was supposed to be standing beside you when the beast knelt. The plan was for him to look like he'd known, like he'd orchestrated it, like the Moonborn heir and the Alpha King were a unified front. She let that sit. The plan. 6 years of careful positioning. Keep her close enough to use, distant enough to control, visible enough to deploy when the time came. Put her in the arena for the Blood Moon trials, not to kill her, but to trigger the recognition in a controlled, staged way that made Darius look like the man behind it. Except Darius hadn't been told that part. Or he had, and something had broken in him tonight. Some long accumulated pressure finding the crack. And he had stood in front of 12,000 people and sent her in with genuine contempt, genuine certainty that she was less than she was. And the plan had come apart because the man at the center of it had stopped following it. The instrument had feelings he'd never mentioned. The tool had stopped trusting the hand that held it. The Alpha King, who had been handed a Moonborn heir and told she was a weapon, had spent 6 years living with her and had concluded she was worthless. And in that conclusion had destroyed 6 years of careful manipulation, and here they all were. She thought, even the longest laid plans break when the people inside them start acting like people instead of pieces. She thought, my father sold me to men who were not as smart as they believed themselves to be. She thought, I have been standing in the middle of this for 6 years, and none of them ever once considered that I might be paying attention. She let go of the chair, turned toward the door. Where are you going? Vale said. To find Darius. Serafina, if you walk into that throne room right now without a plan. She stopped, turned back toward him. Not all the way, just enough that her voice would carry in his direction with full weight. Lord Vale, in the last 2 hours I walked into an arena full of wolves, stood while the alpha beast knelt, and listened to you explain that every person I've trusted since I was 17 has been operating me like a piece on a board. A pause. Do you genuinely want to tell me right now that I don't have a plan? She didn't wait for his answer. The alpha beast rose from its place by the door and fell in beside her as she moved into the corridor, and Corvin came 3 paces back without being asked, and she walked with her staff and her count and the enormous warm weight of the animal beside her. And she thought about Darius Vane sitting in a throne room somewhere in this castle, the man who had sent her to die tonight, the man who had been handed a weapon he didn't understand and had spent 6 years resenting the weight of it. She thought about what it would mean to walk into that room, not as the blind Luna he'd stripped, not as the instrument the council had built her for, not even as the moonborn heir the wild packs had just declared. Not yet, not tonight, not until she'd looked him in the face with the full knowledge of what both of them actually were. She thought, this is the part where a different woman would want an apology. She thought, I don't want an apology. I want the truth. All of it. From his mouth, not Vale's, not Brennan's, not the council's record. His. Because until she had that, until she knew exactly which parts of the last 6 years Darius had known and which parts he'd been fed like everyone else, she didn't know what she was walking into the next 48 hours to build. And she was going to build something. The certainty of that had settled in her chest somewhere between the alpha beast's forehead touching her palm and Vael's voice explaining what her father had done, and it was not the hot, sharp certainty of fury. It was the other kind, the cold, structural kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself and doesn't require an audience and simply begins. She was 12 steps from the throne room door when she heard it. Glass breaking. Inside. Then a body hitting the floor. Not falling, thrown. The specific sound of mass meeting stone with force rather than failure. Then a voice she knew. Darius. Low and hard and stripped of everything except the animal register that Alpha Kings only reached when something had broken past the governance layer into whatever was underneath it. You had 6 years. Not a question. A verdict. 6 years to tell me what she was. A second voice, older. She placed it in 2 seconds. Elder Soren, who had apparently been summoned here before she arrived, said something she couldn't catch through the door's thickness. I don't care about the plan. Darius's voice cracked on the last word. Not with emotion, with pressure. The pressure of a man who has just discovered that the 6 years he thought he was living were a different 6 years than the ones actually happening around him. I sent her into that arena because I thought. Another crack. This one wasn't his voice. It was the door. She put her hand on the latch. Beside her, the alpha beast exhaled one long, slow breath. She pushed the door open. The throne room was already broken before she walked into it. She heard it in the first second, the specific acoustic signature of a large space that had recently experienced violence. Something shattered on the stone floor to her left, glass or ceramic, the pieces still settling. A chair overturned, she tracked its position by the way sound moved around it differently than the surrounding floor. The fire in the central hearth was high. She could feel the heat from the doorway, and underneath the heat and the smoke was the sharp copper note of fresh blood. Not much, but present. Soren was against the far wall. She placed him by his breathing, old man breath working harder than it should, the specific cadence of someone who'd been grabbed or pushed and hadn't fully recovered the pretense of composure. Darius was 8 feet inside the room, off-center, his weight distributed wrong. She'd tracked his footfalls for 6 years, and this wasn't his standing weight. This was his fighting weight. Heels slightly lifted, body coiled around whatever was happening inside it. And on the floor between them, she picked up a third presence, not standing, not unconscious. The breathing was too deliberate for unconscious. Sitting. Contained. Someone who had been put on the floor and had decided that staying there, for now, was the correct tactical choice. She didn't know that breathing pattern. She stepped fully into the room. The alpha beast came through the doorway behind her. She heard Soren make a sound she'd never heard from him before, something bitten off and involuntary, and settled to her left with the particular quality of an animal that has arrived at a place it intends to stay. Serafina. Darius's voice. Stripped. The governance layer was completely gone. What was left was something raw, something she didn't have a name for because she'd never heard it from him. Close the door. Corvin behind her pulled it shut. The room sealed. Who's on the floor? She said. A beat. Then Darius. His name is Wren. He works for Vale. He was in this room when I arrived and he had access to the war dispatch cabinet. The war dispatch cabinet. She knew it. The iron-reinforced case bolted to the north wall, which held the Alpha King's sealed communications with the border commanders. The orders that moved armies. The orders that could, in the wrong hands, move armies in the wrong directions. What did he take? She said. Nothing yet. A pause with something violent barely contained inside it. He hadn't finished. What was he going to take? Darius didn't answer immediately. She heard him move. 2 steps, a shift in weight, the sound of a man who needed to be doing something physical to keep from coming apart, and was rationing his movement to avoid revealing that. The border commander communication seals, copies of my dispatch codes. The shape of it completed itself in her mind with the cold finality of a lock engaging. Dispatch codes, border commanders. The Wild Packs had just declared a moonborn heir in the arena, which meant, in the next 48 hours, the kingdom's power structure was going to reorganize around the moonborn clause, whether Vale and Brennan and their people wanted it to or not. Unless the border commanders received orders, sealed, coded, authenticated orders, to mobilize against the Wild Pack territories before the council convening could be called. Unless the 48-hour window was filled with enough military movement that the convening became irrelevant, wars had been started with less. She turned toward where the man on the floor was breathing. Wren. The breathing shifted. Surprised, she thought, that she'd addressed him directly. You're going to tell me exactly what Lord Vale's instructions were, she said. Not because I'm asking politely, because in approximately 20 minutes this room is going to contain 6 additional people, including Elder Soren's witness authority and Lord Cassian, who has spent this entire evening being the only pack lord in those terraces actually paying attention. Whatever you tell me now is a confession to one Alpha King and a blind woman. Whatever you tell me 20 minutes from now is a confession to the full preliminary council. She paused. Choose which room you want to be in. Silence from the floor. Then, I don't know the full plan. Young voice. Controlled, but young, and frightened underneath the control, in the way young men get frightened when they realize the job they took has consequences they didn't fully price. I was told to get the codes to Lord Vale before the council convening was called. That's all I knew. Who told you? Vale's senior man. Harwick. Darius. Harwick has been Vale's man for 15 years. I know, she said. You knew about Harwick. I knew about Harwick 18 months ago. She turned toward Darius's voice. I didn't have authority to act on it. I didn't have authority to act on anything. I was the Luna who sat behind the council procession and wasn't sent for. The air in the room changed. She hadn't meant it as an attack. She'd meant it as information, clean, factual, the way she'd learned to deliver hard things in the years when her only currency was precision. But it landed as something else, and she felt it land, and she didn't apologize for it because an apology would have been a lie, and she was done with useful lies. Darius's footfall, 1 step, stopped. Serafina. His voice had changed again. Not the stripped raw quality from before, not the governance layer, not the command register. Something she hadn't heard. Something that had no precedent in 6 years of cataloged sounds, and she couldn't place it until she placed it, and when she did, it hit her somewhere below the sternum with unexpected force. It was the sound of a man who was about to say something true. I was told you were a liability, he said. First month. Vale and Croft. They came to me together, which should have told me something but didn't. And they said the Alliance had given the kingdom a Luna who couldn't stand in trial, couldn't lead in crisis, couldn't defend the territory if it came to it. They had a full argument. It was detailed. It was... He stopped. It was convincing, and I wanted to be convinced. I want you to understand that. I wanted it to be true because the alternative was that I'd been given something I didn't know how to... Another stop. Something I didn't know how to hold. The room held its breath. So you spent 6 years believing it, she said. Yes. And tonight you stood in front of 12,000 people and acted on it. Yes. And now you know it was constructed. That Vale and Croft built the case because they needed you to undervalue me so I'd be available to deploy when they needed me deployed. Yes. The word had almost no sound in it. Serafina, not yet. She held up a hand. There's a man on your floor with your dispatch codes in his head and Vael's senior operative somewhere in this castle and 42 minutes until the border commander's night dispatch goes out. I need you to tell me which of your commanders are clean. A beat. Then something shifted in Darius's breathing. She heard it, the specific moment when a man stops being inside his own devastation and comes back to the room. The moment when personal catastrophe gets filed behind immediate necessity, not because it's less real, but because survival requires sequencing. She had lived in that moment so many times she could recognize it in someone else's breath. Harrow in the north, he said. Commander Sarah in the Western Pass. She reports directly to me, not through the council chain, and Davon at the southern border. 3 clean lines. 3 I'm certain of. Send them now. Personal seal, not the council codes. Tell them the border holds. No mobilization orders are valid until the convening clears. She turned toward where Soren's breathing was still elevated against the far wall. Elder Soren, I need you functional. A pause. Then the old man's voice, shaky at the edges but finding its axis. I'm functional. You said in the arena you'd known for 30 years. Yes. Known what exactly? Be precise. Another pause, this one the kind that contains a decision about how honest to be. She heard him make it. Your mother's line. The Ashcroft bloodline traces back to the last recorded moonborn heir, 142 years ago. When the line was declared extinct, it wasn't accurate. The last heir had a daughter. That daughter's descendants were scattered, hidden, deliberately. He exhaled. Your grandfather brought the family to the Northern Territories, changed the family name twice. Your father rediscovered the lineage through his own records research and understood what it meant. And sold it, she said. Soren didn't deny it. She thought about her mother, who had died when she was 8 and who she remembered mostly by scent, dried herbs and wood smoke and the specific warm weight quality of arms that held without needing to explain why. Her mother, who had never once mentioned the moonborn line, who had died before Serafina's father had apparently decided what to do with the information he'd found. She thought, some things you carry without knowing you're carrying them. She thought, some inheritances choose you long before you choose them. Corvin, she said, get Cassian. He's been waiting for exactly this, and he knows it. I need him in this room in 10 minutes. Corvin moved. She crossed to the center of the throne room and stopped, planted her staff, listened to the room around her. Soren steadying himself, Darius moving to the dispatch desk, the scratch of wax and the knock of a seal being applied. The man ran on the floor, still there, still breathing the careful breath of someone who has decided that being cooperative is the only available survival strategy. The alpha beast settled fully onto the stone floor behind her with the sound of an enormous body finding rest. The room organized itself around that sound the way all rooms organize themselves around the alpha beast now, not with fear, not with the flinching quality of threatened space, but with the particular recalibration of an environment that has accepted a new gravity. She was thinking about Vael, not with anger. She had moved past the anger somewhere in the council chamber, let it complete itself and become something colder and more architectural. She was thinking about Vael the way you think about a structural problem. Where are the load-bearing points? Where does the weight distribute? What fails first when you remove the central support? The central support was the dispatch codes. Ren hadn't gotten them, which meant Vale's 48-hour plan had a hole in it the size of the thing it depended on, which meant Vale was going to adapt. She was still turning that over when the first explosion hit. Not inside the castle, outside, east wall, far enough that it came through the stone as vibration rather than sound, a deep structural shudder that moved through the floor and up through her boots and into her legs before it registered as an actual event. Then the sound caught up, rolling through the corridors and hitting the throne room like a slow wave, deep, percussive, the kind of sound that means something load-bearing has been compromised. Darius was at the dispatch desk. She heard him stop moving. Then the shouts began, distant, multiplying, the specific quality of castle staff encountering something they hadn't been trained for. "East wall," Darius said. "Vale's adapting," she said. The second explosion hit before she finished the word. Closer this time, south corridor, and this one brought plaster dust she could smell and a vibration strong enough that the shattered glass on the floor moved. The alpha beast came off the floor immediately, fully upright, and she felt the shift in the air around it. Not panic, not the blind reactive energy of a frightened animal. Something operational. The alpha beast was reading the environment the way it had read the arena, assessing with the particular calm of a predator that doesn't differentiate between situations requiring action. "Darius, they had charges set. Before the trials. They planned for multiple outcomes and they set charges. They needed chaos," she said. "If the council convening can't happen because the castle is under—" "Corvin, stop." She turned toward the door. "Don't go out there yet." Corvin had his hand on the door. He stopped. "They need the chaos to look like a wild pack attack," she said. The pieces moved as she spoke them. "If the border commanders receive word that the castle is under assault on the same night the wild packs declared a moonborn heir—" "Darius, did you get the dispatches out?" "2 of 3. The northern line is still open." "Close it, now. Don't give them a line to put false orders through." She turned toward the door. "Soren, when Cassian gets here, you tell him exactly what you told me, word for word. He needs the full record from a council elder, not from me." "And you?" Soren's voice. Steadier now. The old man had found his floor. "I'm going to the east wall. Serafina." Darius. A different register than any she'd heard from him tonight. Not command, not governance. Something that didn't have his usual armor around it. She turned toward him. In 6 years she had never been able to read his face, had traced it once with her hands, early, and built a static map of it, and had spent every year since updating the map with what she heard in his voice rather than what she could see. She updated it now, stripped and certain, and carrying something she didn't know yet whether she had the capacity to address. "When this is over," she said, "we're going to have a conversation about 6 years, all of it. No council in the room, no Soren, no Vale." She paused. "But right now there are soldiers in this castle that Vael is using to burn down what those 12,000 people saw tonight, and I'm not going to let him burn it." A beat. "I'll come with you," Darius said. "I know." She turned toward the door. "I counted on it." The east corridor was smoke and shouting, and the specific chaos of a castle that has been designed for ceremony discovering it is suddenly a battlefield. She moved through it with her staff and her count and the alpha beast at her shoulder, and Darius came 2 steps behind. She heard him fall into position, heard the change in his movement that meant he'd armed himself from somewhere in the throne room, the weight and cadence of a man carrying a weapon shifting the rhythm of his walk. 6 years of catalogued footfalls. She knew that rhythm as well as she knew her own. He stayed 2 steps back, not behind her, not quite, beside her, offset, the formation of 2 people moving in tandem rather than one person following another. She noticed it. She didn't comment on it. Some things you acknowledged by not acknowledging them. The east wall access was 40 steps from the throne room corridor junction. She knew this, had counted it, was counting it now over the noise of shouts and the acrid spread of smoke filling the corridor. At 37 steps she heard it, the specific acoustic change of an interior corridor opening onto larger space, and underneath that, voices, organized voices, the voices of people giving and receiving orders, which was different from the scattered shouting of panicked staff. Vale's men were already inside the wall. She stopped at the access door, heard Darius pull up beside her, close enough now that she could feel his warmth. The alpha beast was a solid weight on her left. "How many?" she said. Quiet. "Can't tell from here," Darius said. Lower. East access is a choke point, single corridor before it opens to the wall platform. They'll be holding the choke point. Yes. She thought about the east wall's architecture. She had walked it twice in 6 years, memorized it by necessity rather than strategy, had not known until this moment that she would need the map. The wall platform extended 90 feet north-south, 2 access stairwells, one at each end. If Vael's men held the central access choke point, the north stairwell was still open. She turned back the way they'd come. North stairwell, she said, 40 seconds. Darius didn't question it. That was the second thing she noticed. The first had been the formation. The second was this. He was moving when she moved, trusting the map she had without asking to see it. 6 years late, but present. She was running, which she almost never did in corridors because corridors were full of variables, and running was a commitment to the known map against the reality of the current space. She was committing tonight, full speed, staff out, counting. She hit the north stairwell door at the exact step she'd expected, shouldered it open, took the stairs 2 at a time with her hand on the rail, and the Alpha Beast's massive presence right behind her, Darius's boots loud and fast on the stone. The wall platform opened around her at the top. Cold night air. Blood moon light she couldn't see but could feel like pressure on her skin. And the noise. Close now. Organized. The sound of Vael's men working fast on the south end of the platform, and underneath it, from below and beyond the castle walls, the rolling cascade of wolf howls she recognized because she'd heard it once tonight already. The wild packs. They'd heard the explosions, they'd heard the recognition call, and then the explosions, and they were moving. She could tell by the sound's direction multiple sources drawing closer, converging on the castle's east face from the hill territories. Vael had miscalculated. He'd planned for chaos inside the castle, for false military dispatches, for the border commanders receiving orders before the convening could be called. He had not planned, could not have planned, because no one had planned for this before tonight, for the Alpha Beast to be inside the castle walls, for the wild packs to have already declared, for the recognition call to mean that 12,000 witnesses were still in and around that arena when his men set off the first charge. He had planned for a controlled deployment of a moonborn heir. He had gotten something that refused to be controlled. She felt Darius stop beside her on the platform, heard his breath, harder from the stairs, and underneath the exertion something she heard as the specific quality of a man seeing and understanding simultaneously. "They're coming," he said. The wild packs. She heard him tracking the howls, placing them. From the hills, yes. They came because I'm here, she said, flat and factual. Because the Alpha Beast is here, and the call went out, and the wild packs don't wait for council convening, Darius. They move when the bloodline moves. The platform shuddered under a third explosion, smaller, south end. Structural damage she assessed by the way the stone vibrated differently underneath her feet. Vael's men shouting. The Alpha Beast beside her building into something she felt as much as heard. A deep subvocal current running through its chest, growing, the kind of sound that preceded the declaration call. She put her hand on its shoulder, felt the current running through her palm, up her arm, into her chest where it resonated with the thing she'd felt in the arena. The thing that had always been there, warm and patient, waiting on the other side of a wall she hadn't known how to name. She knew how to name it now. The Alpha Beast looked at her. She felt the weight of it, the full focused attention of the oldest alpha in the wild pack territories directed at her face, waiting, asking. She had never given a command in 6 years of living in a castle that didn't hear her. She took one breath. "Call them in," she said. The Alpha Beast threw its head back. The sound that came out of it was not the recognition call and not the declaration call. It was the third call, the one the old texts had listed last and described least. The one with the translation that all 3 archivists she'd asked had rendered differently, because there was no clean equivalent in civilized pack language. The closest version, the one she'd settled on, was, "Come to war." The hills answered, and from somewhere below on the castle grounds, inside the walls, from the direction of the east courtyard, from the training yard where the castle's loyal garrison had been assembling since the first explosion, She heard a voice she recognized. Lord Cassian, clear and carrying and absolutely certain. That is the Moonborn call. Every man here who wants to be on the right side of what happens next, move to the east wall, now. Running boots, many of them, the specific percussion of a garrison finding its direction. Serafina stood at the top of the north stairwell on the east wall platform and felt the night organizing itself. Wild packs converging from the hills, Cassian's forces moving from below, Vale's men somewhere to the south realizing that what they'd planned for and what was actually happening had stopped being the same thing. Darius Vane put his hand on her arm. Not a grab, not a direction, the specific pressure of a hand that needed contact with something real. She didn't pull away. "Whatever you're about to do," he said. Quiet, just for her. "Tell me where you need me," she told him. And then the east wall door at the south end burst open, and Vael's men came through it, and the Alpha Beast moved, and the night stopped being the night it had been planned as, and became something no one had planned for at all. The east wall fight lasted 11 minutes. Serafina knew, because she counted, not consciously, not with the deliberate attention she gave to corridor steps and council chamber voices, but in the way the body counts things it needs to survive. Her mind kept time while everything else ran on instinct and memory and the specific intelligence of a woman who had spent 6 years building a map of a world she couldn't see. Vael's men were trained. She gave them that. They came through the south door organized and fast, 7 of them by her count, with the particular disciplined aggression of fighters who had rehearsed this specific entry point. What they had not rehearsed was the Alpha Beast. Nothing could have rehearsed for the Alpha Beast. It moved the way the old text described, and the way no description had fully prepared her for, not fast exactly, but inevitable, the way weather is inevitable, the way the ground is inevitable when you fall toward it. She heard the first 2 men go down in the opening seconds. Not dead, she didn't think, but removed from the equation with the efficient economy of something that understood force without needing to be taught it. Darius was already moving by then. She tracked him by the sound of it. The specific cadence of an Alpha King who had spent 20 years earning the title in practice yards and border skirmishes, not just inheriting it. He was good. She had never had occasion to know how good. She knew now. She stayed at the north stairwell with her staff, and her attention spread across the whole platform like a net, catching everything. The position of bodies in motion, the gaps in the fighting where Vael's remaining men were trying to regroup, the sound from below the east wall where Cassian's garrison was moving into the courtyard, the cascading howls from the hills drawing closer and closer until they weren't from the hills anymore, until they were at the wall base, until they were inside. The wild packs came over the east wall like water over a broken dam, not attacking the castle, attacking the men inside it who had set the charges, who had come in the night with Vael's orders and Brennan's money, and the particular arrogance of people who had planned for every outcome except the one where the woman they'd spent 6 years treating as an instrument turned out to have been paying attention the whole time. 11 minutes. Then it was over. The platform settled into the specific silence of a place where something violent has just stopped. Not peaceful, not empty, but the silence of aftermath, which has its own texture and weight. She heard Darius's breathing from 12 feet away, harder than it should be. The breath of a man who has used himself fully and is now accounting for the cost. She heard Cassian's voice from below, organizing, giving instructions in the clipped, efficient way of someone who knows what to do with a situation once the fighting part is done. She heard, at the south end of the platform, the sound she'd been waiting for. Lord Vael. Not his boots. She hadn't heard him come through the south door with his men, which meant he'd come another way, which meant he'd been here longer than she'd known. She identified him by his breathing and then by his voice, low and directed at someone she couldn't immediately place. "Move," Vael said. Clipped, the voice of a man executing a contingency. She turned toward it. "Lord Vael." Silence. Then, "Serafina." "You stayed to see how it ended," she said. She was moving toward him, staff out, reading the platform's surface. "That was a mistake. Smart men leave when the plan fails. You stayed because some part of you needed to know." Needed to know what? Whether I was real. She stopped. She had him positioned now, 20 feet, slightly elevated, the wall's parapet edge behind him. Whether what happened in the arena was what it looked like, whether the Moonborn line was actually standing in your castle, or whether it was a story you could still manage. A long pause. "You're not what we planned for," he said, and his voice had lost the careful control. Not broken, not frightened exactly, but honest in the way voices get honest when the architecture around them has come down and there's nothing left to hide behind. "We planned for something we could use, something we could point. We didn't plan for something that points itself." "I know," she said. "That's why you failed." The alpha beast was beside her. She felt Vial register it, the specific quality of a man's stillness when something enormous enters his awareness and he is deciding, in real time, whether he has any options left. He didn't. She heard him understand that. "What happens now?" he said. "Now you tell Elder Soren and Lord Cassian everything. Every conversation, every instruction, every plan you built across 6 years. Not because I'm threatening you, because it's the only version of what happens next where you still exist inside the kingdom's law rather than outside it." She paused. "Outside it, Lord Vial, the wild packs hold jurisdiction. I don't think you want that judgment." The silence that followed was the sound of a man measuring distances and finding all of them insufficient. "Everything," he said finally. "Everything." He moved toward the north stairwell. Cassian's men were already coming up. She heard them, heard Cassian himself at the top of the stairs, heard the moment when Cassian and Vale met on the platform, and Cassian's voice went very quiet and very certain, the way voices do when they have arrived at the moment they've been working toward. She let them handle it. She turned back toward the center of the platform and found Darius 3 feet from her. She hadn't heard him approach. He'd moved quietly, which was not how he usually moved, which told her something about the quality of his attention right now. "It's done," she said. "Vial, Cassian has him. It's done." A long breath from Darius. She heard him process that, heard the specific quality of a man letting something go that he'd been holding at full tension for 11 minutes, for an hour, for 6 years, and finding that the release didn't feel the way he'd expected. Relief rarely does. They stood on the east wall in the blood moon's copper light, and the sounds of aftermath moved around them. Cassian's organized voice below, the wild pack settling into the courtyard, and the hill approaches with the patient quality of animals that have done what they came to do, the distant sound of castle staff beginning the work of assessing damage and beginning repairs. "I owe you more than an apology," Darius said. "Yes." "I know an apology isn't—" "Darius," she turned toward him, "I know, and you know I know. Let's not perform the conversation we're both too tired to perform right now." A sound from him she couldn't fully classify. Not quite a laugh, not quite the opposite. Something in between, something that had no name in the catalog she'd built of his sounds over 6 years because it hadn't existed in his range until tonight. "What do you need?" he said. She considered that. The genuine question, stripped of agenda, stripped of the 6 years of managed distance between them. "What do you need?" asked the way you ask it when you actually want the answer. She wasn't certain she knew what to do with it. "I need the convening called," she said. 48 hours. Full council. I'll call it at dawn. And I need Soren's full testimony in the record. Everything he told me in the throne room. He'll give it." A pause. "He's been carrying it for 30 years. I don't think he'll need much persuading." She nodded, turned back toward the night air. The blood moon had moved. She could feel its light at a different angle now, lower, the night pulling toward its far end. The howls from the courtyard below had settled into something quieter, a sustained low sound she'd come to recognize in the hours since the arena as the wild pack's version of presence rather than declaration. "We are here. We remain." She thought about her father. She had been thinking about him in pieces since Vial's voice in the council chamber, returning to it and leaving it, and returning again the way you probe a wound to establish its edges. Her father, who had found the records and understood what they meant and chosen to use that understanding as currency. Who had put her in a carriage and called it marriage and sold it as alliance and sent her 300 miles away. She thought, he made me into what I needed to be to survive what he did to me. He kept me out of the power structures, which meant I had to learn power from the edges. He kept me from being heard in councils, which meant I had to learn to hear everything. He sent me to a man who didn't know what to do with me, which meant I had to learn to do it myself. She didn't forgive him for it, but she understood, standing on the east wall with the aftermath settling around her, that understanding and forgiving were separate things and didn't have to happen at the same time. She had spent 6 years trying to compress them into a single motion, trying to understand the people who had used her well enough to forgive them quickly enough to keep moving. What she had actually done, she saw now, was skip the understanding entirely and call the motion forgiveness. That was done. The understanding was allowed to be what it was without the forgiveness attached to it. And the forgiveness, if it came, for her father, for Darius, for the senior council's years of careful maneuvering, for all of it, was allowed to come on its own schedule, not hers. She thought, surviving the thing is not the same as finishing with it. Sometimes finishing with it takes longer than surviving it did. She thought, I have time. The council convening happened 39 hours later, called at dawn as Darius had promised, and assembled by noon in the great hall with every pack lord present and Elder Soren at the record-keeper's seat, and Cassian at the proceedings chair that tradition assigned to the most senior impartial lord in attendance. Seraphina sat at the center table. The Alpha Beast lay at the hall's entrance and had not moved in 39 hours, except to follow her from room to room and return when she returned. The hall had stopped reacting to it by the second day. People adjust. She had observed this across 23 years of being the thing people had to adjust to. The capacity for adjustment was enormous and underestimated. You put something real in front of people and give them enough time and they find a way to make it ordinary. She had made herself ordinary in 100 rooms. The Alpha Beast was making itself ordinary now. Vale testified for 4 hours. She listened to all of it. Every arrangement, every instruction, every conversation with her father's envoy 6 years ago when the deal was made, every council meeting where Darius had been managed away from treating her as a partner, every small decision made over years to keep the Moonborn heir available and controllable until the Blood Moon trials provided the stage they'd been building toward. It was thorough. It was damning. It was, in its way, a form of penance. Not the kind that absolved, but the kind that completed, that said everything that needed saying and put it in the record where it couldn't be managed or revised. Brennan testified for 2 hours, Croft for 1. Harwick, Vale's senior man, had fled the castle. Cassian had people looking. Darius testified last. She hadn't expected that, had expected him to preside, to manage, to use the Alpha King's authority to shape the narrative the way authority always tries to shape narratives. Instead, he asked Cassian for witness status, sat at the side table rather than the head, and said in front of every pack lord in the kingdom exactly what he had known and when he'd known it, and what he had chosen to believe, and what the consequences of those choices had been. It took 40 minutes. The hall was very quiet for all of them. She sat at the center table and listened to Darius Vane dismantle 6 years of his own authority in the service of accuracy, and she thought, this is not absolution. He knows it's not absolution. He's not doing it for absolution. He was doing it because it was true and the record needed the truth more than he needed to manage his own reputation. She filed that away. Not under forgiveness, under information, under the category of things she hadn't known about him and was now learning, which was a different category than the one she'd been building for 6 years. The convening found in full support of the Moonborn Clause at the end of the second day. It was not a close vote. The recognition call, Soren's testimony, the testimony of 12,000 arena witnesses, and Vale's own 4-hour account had left the council very little room for alternative interpretation. Lord Cassian moved the resolution. 3 lords seconded it simultaneously, which Elder Soren noted for the record as unprecedented. The resolution was, Seraphina Ashcroft, confirmed heir of the Moonborn line, would assume the title of Moon Queen, authority over both civilized pack territories and wild pack lands, the first unified governance in 142 years. A new seat of authority, not subordinate to the Alpha King's throne but parallel to it, with its own council structure to be determined in the following months. Darius did not contest it. He stood at the end of the convening and addressed the council and said, The Alpha King's throne acknowledges the Moon Queen's authority as coordinate and independent. The Ashenvale throne will reorganize its council structure to reflect the new governance architecture. This is not a concession, it is a correction. He sat down. She thought about the word. Correction, the same word he'd used in the arena, standing before 10,000 witnesses when he'd stripped her title. He had used it then for the wrong thing. He was using it now for the right one. She thought, people are capable of using the same tools to build that they used to destroy. The tools don't carry the moral weight, the person carrying them does. The formal acknowledgement happened at dusk on the second day, in the same arena, empty now of crowds but holding the specific charged quality of a space that remembers what has passed through it. Elder Soren performed it, the old forms, the old language, the words from the founding codex that no one had used in 140 years because there had been no one to use them for. She stood in the center of the arena floor, the alpha beast beside her. Darius stood at the arena's edge, not on the king's dais, not elevated, at the floor level, the same ground. She hadn't asked him to do that. He had chosen it. Soren's voice in the empty arena, by the blood of the Moonborn line confirmed in the recognition call of the Blood Moon, witnessed by the wild packs and the civilized packs and every lord of this kingdom. I name you Moon Queen of Ashenvale, first of the unified title, ruler of the two worlds. She said nothing for a moment, then, I hear it. The alpha beast raised its head and called once, a single clean sound that the empty arena caught and held and released slowly into the night air beyond the walls. From the hills and the courtyard and the castle grounds, the wild packs answered. She stood in the center of it and let it complete. The weeks that followed were not gentle. Governance never is, and unified governance of two territories that had been divided for 140 years was specifically, deliberately, exhaustingly ungentile. There were border disputes and pack lords who had accepted the convening's resolution with their public voices and resisted it with their administrative ones. And there were wild pack leaders who had declared for the Moonborn heir in the arena and now needed the abstract declaration translated into concrete arrangements they could live inside. She worked. Every day. The same way she had always worked, methodically, through the information available, using the tools at hand, finding the map of the room and memorizing it, and then working the map. Darius worked beside her, not as Alpha King directing the Moon Queen's new authority, as the man who had agreed, in a brief conversation at the end of the convening, to spend however long it took earning the right to be beside her rather than assuming it. She had not offered that conversation. He had initiated it. That mattered to her more than the words of it. He sat in her council meetings and spoke when she asked him to, and was quiet when she didn't. He handled the Alpha King's administrative territory, the military structure, the border command chain, the court protocols, with the particular competence of a man who had been trained for exactly that, and was using it now in service of something larger than himself. She watched him adapt. Watched the Alpha King's instinct for control renegotiate itself into something more like partnership. It wasn't seamless. Nothing worth anything is. There were conversations that went badly and had to be revisited. There were council meetings where his instinct to lead ran directly into her authority and they had to stop and recalibrate. There was one night, 3 weeks in, when she told him in clear, flat language what the 6 years of strategic undervaluing had cost her. Not the crown, not the title, but herself. Her own understanding of whether she was worth the attention she paid to everything around her. That conversation lasted hours. Neither of them slept, but they had it. She thought, you can't build anything worth living in on top of a buried thing. You have to dig it out first. You have to know what's actually in the ground before you decide what to build on it. The wild packs integrated slowly and on their own terms, which was the only way they would integrate and the only way she wanted them to. The Alpha Beast had returned to the hills the morning after the convening, and she had heard it go without asking it to stay, because it didn't belong inside walls and she understood that. It came back sometimes. She'd hear it at the east wall in the early mornings, a presence rather than an announcement, checking the way wolves check on things they've claimed. She'd stand at the wall and feel it there, and that was enough. Some bonds don't require proximity. Some things you carry in the blood, and they don't need to be near you to be real. 4 months after the Blood Moon trials, the first joint council of the Moon Queen's unified territories met in the arena, not for trials, not for ceremony, but for governance. Pack lords and wild pack leaders in the same space, around a table, working through the first formal agreements of 142 years of division being slowly, imperfectly, necessarily repaired. She sat at the head of the table. Darius sat at the side. He had stepped down from the Alpha King's throne 2 months prior, formally and publicly, in front of the full council. Not because she had required it. She had not. Because he had told her, in one of the late conversations that had become the infrastructure of whatever they were building, that he couldn't lead a territory that deserved better leadership and also do what was required to earn the thing he actually wanted, which was to be trusted by her, and that the two tasks were incompatible if he was also holding a throne. He was serving now as council advisor to the Moon Queen's administration, rebuilding the border commander relationships with the men and women who had received his personal sealed dispatches on the night of the Blood Moon and had held the borders clean, finding, in the particular work of repair rather than rule, what he was actually useful for when the performance of power was removed. She watched him do it, not with pity, not with the distance she'd maintained for 6 years, with the attention she gave everything, full, specific, updated daily. He was not the man she'd thought he was for 6 years. She was still finding out who he actually was. That was not the same as forgiveness. It was not the same as restored trust. It was something earlier and more honest than both of those, the stage before them, the part where you stop working from the map you made in the dark and start making a new one in better light. She thought it was enough for now. She thought, you don't get the ending all at once. You get it in the pieces you can carry, and you carry those until you can reach for the next ones. The last wolves howled at midnight, and the moon had moved past the blood position and was heading toward pale, ordinary silver, and the first joint council had run 6 hours and resolved 3 disputes and opened 2 more that would need the next session, and Seraphina Ashcroft, Moon Queen of the unified Ashenvale territories, walked back through the corridors of the castle she had memorized in the dark. She counted the steps. Not because she needed to anymore. She had never needed to, exactly. It was never about needing, but because it was hers. The count was hers. The dark was hers. The 23 years of building a life inside a world that didn't offer her its surface were hers, and they had made her into something that a 142-year-old exile of power had been waiting for, and she was not going to walk away from the method now that the destination had arrived. Some tools you don't put down. Some things you were built by, you carry forward. 37 steps from the council chamber to the first staircase, 42 down to the second level, 63 through the great hall if you kept to the left wall and counted the column bases. She counted every one. She arrived.